Okay, good evening, everyone. This is Lori Charlton, and this is a special meeting of the Board of Finance Audit Subcommittee. Special meeting because we changed the date and deferred this meeting from when it was regularly scheduled in September. And we did that so that we could allow additional time for the completion of the items that we are going to discuss on tonight's agenda. This meeting is intended to discuss matters related to the audit subcommittee, but also the purchasing subcommittee. We really have one big related item, which we'll get to later in the meeting, which is the subject of the draft purchasing policy that's being developed. And that was the subject of numerous comments that were in the DPW audit report that's been under review by this committee for the past year or so. So with that, I will call the meeting to order. And the first item we have on the agenda is just a quick update to hear a status on our financial statement audit. And we have here with us Mr. Joe Santafanti, who is the audit partner from PKF O'Connor Davies, who is performing our annual audit. Joe, I'll turn it over to you. Can you just give us a brief update of where things stand and timing?
Okay, so where we're at is we've got to receive the trial balance, a draft of the report and some other items. We're scheduled for field work actually 11/3, 11/4. So next Wednesday, Thursday, and we'll work on it in between from here, but we'll be on site on 11/3 and 11/4.
Okay. And I don't know if this question, I should direct this to you or Ms. Caitlin Bossi, who's also here joining us, but what is the expected timing of completing the audit and having a draft available of the audited financial statements?
You have to look. Normally what holds up is pension OPEB, and I can't remember if we did receive those. So it would probably be beginning in December based upon that timeline, as long as we have that information, or again, we certainly could have a draft without the pension and OPEB information. I didn't check and see if we actually have that information or not. Caitlin, I don't know, do you know as far as
this is Caitlin. We have not received it. I know they have all the required information from the town. I have not confirmed with whether the Board of Ed has given their stuff. I'm kind of assuming that they have, but I have not confirmed on their piece. But I know all the town pieces have been sent over to Hooker and Holcomb for both pension and OPEB.
Okay. So as far as the rest of the audit, we'll get the majority of the work that those couple days. The pension OPEB are some big pieces, so that will affect the footnotes, the RSI, and the top statements. So we would expect that hopefully we'll be through that week or the next week with most of the non-government wide items. We should be able to get that completed. The one thing that that's going to be different this year that kind of came out of indirectly the merger with another firm is the parking authority. And looking at that, and this other firm did it for years. That firm happened to merge in with us, and I kind of did the quality review of that. It looks like that really meets the definition of a component unit. That should be included in the town's financial statements instead of just being a separate audit. So that will be a change this year to put that in. It'll show up as a proprietary type, a enterprise fund. I'm not sure. It's been around a while, but it's never been in the town audit, but it does meet the definition because of the appointing of the board members, and they don't really have authority to issue bonds and that type of thing. So that will be something that's different. It'll be a whole separate 3 schedules, the balance sheet, operating statement, and cash flows, because it is accrual based. So that's one thing that will be different. The other thing I just want to talk about is mention also is the ARPA money. If revenue replacement is used, that will impact the federal state single audit this year. And right now, we're still waiting for final regulations. We are still waiting for the compliance supplement, which was projected to be in November. So the probability is that the federal single audit will be issued after 12/31. The state single audit will be completed because there's nothing that's impacting that. But we're not expecting to get the information we need to audit that grant in time. So the normal due date for that is March 31. The year after, March 31, 22, but that's even been extended out to September 30, 22. We don't expect to need that long, but the probability is it will not be issued at 12/31.
Okay, thank you for that update, Joe. So just to clarify, both of these things sound like they result in an increase in the scope of your work. So the parking authority has been completely outside the financial statements. Now would be reported as a proprietary fund. So you would have to do some work on those financials, which you haven't done in the past. Is that what you're saying?
I am, but what my Shelton office that now is part of PKF, they already have a fee agreement, so they're already paying them to do it. So it's being paid out of the parking authority fund. So there is an incremental. So we look at next year, that would be something different if it was going to be more managed by the audit committee. But right now, there already is a fee structure in place because it's always been that separate audit.
So you're saying you would be able to rely on that work that's done and you don't have to do additional audit work in order to be able to include that in the financial statements?
Yeah, so what we're going to do is my team is going to do that audit versus that other team that's done it in the past. So because it's part of the audit and all the records are at town hall, when we come out, we will just do the audit work that, again, my Shelton office normally did. I'm just going to pull it into this process. So it's the same team, same process.
Okay. And you said there's a separate fee arrangement paid from the parking authority, so this shouldn't affect the town this
Right.
year. Okay. And Caitlin, you're on board with all this. You're aware of this, correct?
Yeah, so basically we've been involved in the park authority audit every year. Like Joe said, it was just a different firm doing it. But we've provided the financials. We do a lot of the reports. We do a lot of their reporting anyways. So we've been doing all of it. It's just now a different, I guess, set of people coming in. But they have in the past paid for their own audit as well. So there shouldn't be a general fund impact for this.
Got it. Okay. All right, that's helpful. And ARPA, Joe, I just want to.
Lori, can I ask follow? So that will continue every year then? We'll include it, but there'll be an allocation to the parking authority for their portion of the audit?
I mean, that's up to the town, but yes, conceptually, they're an enterprise fund. Normally they pay all the costs related, so the audit costs can remain being paid out of the parking authority fund versus the general fund budget.
Okay, and then a quick question, Caitlin, are there any other funds like that out there that should possibly be included in the townwide audit that have been separate?
No, that's really been the only fund we've excluded from our reporting all along. So it's not that you really care, but it's like a 699 number. Like general fund is 010, so we go all the way up to like the 500s, and we've been excluding the 699 fund, which is parking authority. So now we'll just run all the funds for the reporting, but there's no other funds that are like that.
Okay, and you don't remember why it was done separately? It's always been.
It's an interesting agreement because it's kind of a quasi-state department because they have state reporting and in theory they kind of report to the state, yet the employees are kind of town employees. So it's always been this weird kind of relationship all along. We do their payroll, we cut their checks, all of their W-2 and all their payroll reporting are under our federal ID. So technically, I guess we've been kind of treating them as a department of the town as long as I've been there. But the audit had always been separate prior to this group kind of being taken over by PKF O'Connor. So it kind of makes sense now to use the same resources that are at town hall to just do both.
Okay, so I just have a question because we've never really even looked at their financials before,
Right.
and we've never voted on their budget or done anything in that regard. Is that something, Joe, that we should be doing, or should I don't fully know how it works, so that's what I'm trying to figure out.
I mean, because it's an enterprise fund that doesn't do budgetary accounting, there are some towns that may adopt or may have budgets for enterprise funds, and some towns do not. So it's something, I mean, you're going to see it now, you're going to see what the operation looks like, and as far as the budget process, that's going to be up to the Board of Finance or whoever to if you want to see that information as part of that process. So I don't remember, there are personnel costs and all that. So I guess when you see the draft, we will break that out like a normal enterprise fund, but it's more going to be salaries and benefits and those type of accounts, contracted services and supplies. So it's going to look a little different.
Right.
And then the accrual, they have their own capital assets. And my understanding in talking to this firm, they've been doing this audit for like 35 years separately. So it's just, I'm not sure how that happened, but looking back, it's not in the charter, which is why it didn't jump out initially. There was an ordinance that created it, and the ordinance creates it under state statutes. So that allows us to be created. But somehow it's just been outside of the reporting. And again, I'm not sure how that other firm really doesn't do government work got that work, and it's just always been that way. But based upon looking at it, it's just it is really part of the town because they're only a commission. They don't have any real powers outside of setting parking rates. If you look at the ordinance, so the bonds that were issued years ago, the town issued the bonds, the parking authority paid it back, and that type of thing. So, and all the bank accounts, all the information is in the town's name, not the authority's name, like a WPCA or a separate authority. It's
Because it was something that confused me when we were approving the ARPA funding. We approved funding that was going towards the the parking lot there, and so that's why I was a little bit confused on it, because I didn't know if the town paid it or whether the parking authority had its own budget and paid their own expenses. So it's kind of a mixed bag, I guess.
Yeah, those are, and Mary, thanks for bringing those questions. I think these are important questions. Joe, I think one thing that might be helpful when you present the financial statements to the Board of Finance is to just maybe go through a brief summary of what the analysis is and why this is considered a component unit. So there's various criteria that you look at to determine whether it gets included in the financials or not. Whatever happened in the past, it is what it is. But based on this analysis, this is why it gets included. What control does the town have? What control does the town have over the management? What legal liability might the town have? Et cetera, et cetera. And just briefly go through that so that everybody can understand kind of what this is. Because I think, to Mary's point, if it's never been in the financials and it hasn't been part of the budget, then I think there's probably just a vacuum of knowledge in terms of how it interacts.
Could we get a copy of the prior year audit report just so we can be a little bit familiar with what they do and like what their revenue is? And
sure. Okay, I'm sure I have one in the file, so I can send you that. Again, this year's revenue is going to look a lot different.
Right.
Last year, so.
That's true. The 2020 was an unusual year.
Yeah,
And I don't know when it came back, so it won't be, representative of the normal operation, but yeah, I can send you last year's audit.
okay, that would be helpful. And I guess a similar question on the, I was confused about what you said about the ARPA money, the impact to the single audit, and another audit that's due later in the year. As far as I'm aware of, we've had our regular audit of the town financials, and then we've had the single audit report that covered, the required percentages of grants and money that the town has gotten from state and federal agencies. From what you implied, is there a separate audit that's done later? I'm not familiar with that. What exactly does that mean? And is that something that we've had in the past?
No, you have a federal and a state single audit in that one.
Right.
They're two separate audits. We just bind them together conceptually.
Right, but those are done at the same time as the audit of the town's financial statements. I guess I got confused about the March date that you threw out there and what that means in relation to what's been done in the past.
The March date is the deadline no matter what. We just always get it done. So what I'm saying for ARPA, I don't have final regulations. I don't have a compliance supplement. So the federal piece is not going to be done at 12/31.
Got it.
I'm not audited. So we're going to give you the state, and then when we get the information, all that stuff comes out, then we will finish the federal single audit and issue that. We have all the way, instead of March is the normal date, we have to September. But we're not going to wait that long as they issue the compliance supplement and the final regs. So we know.
Got it. Okay.
So,
All right. So this is not a separate audit. It's just part of the federal single audit, which we've always had done at the same time the regular audit's been done. But this year, the federal single audit will be delayed because you won't have the compliance supplement, which basically sets forth what you have to do to audit these amounts. Okay.
exactly. Yep, that's it.
Okay. And then you also mentioned within that, the revenue impact. So is it your expectation that you're going to have to specifically look at the validity of, money that we've used based on there being a revenue impact? Can you just explain that a little bit?
Well, it's the revenue replacement. So as a performance transfer, the revenue replacement would generate that you earn the revenue versus spending it. And that revenue replacement, because it's based upon calendar 20, would be recorded as of June 3rd, 21, which then impacts the federal single audit. And what the ICPA has said, and as far as federal single audit goes, is revenue replacement is considered spent and it gets reported on that federal single audit as you spent it. So it's kind of like a performance grant. The performance was you lost revenue based upon that calculation. So you earn the money. It's not a spending, so it's a little bit different. So,
Yeah, I guess what I'm saying is the sort of evidence that we lost the money, right?
we will have,
That's part of what you audit. And okay.
yes, exactly. We'll audit that calculation to validate the amount you claim as a revenue loss. So that will be the majority of the procedures that I know as of right now I will do, and then I'll have to see what the supplement asks us to do when that comes out. But we will audit that calculation.
Okay. And Caitlin, from your perspective, are there any challenges with that on the town side? I mean, we have that calculation, we're ready to sort of hand it over, and any concerns about that?
No, so we've been in contact with Joe, and Connie Saxel did a full evaluation of our revenue loss piece. So we're comfortable with that.
Okay, terrific. Mary, do you have any questions on that piece?
I think I'm good so far.
Okay. All right. Well, if I could just ask one thing, if you could just, Joe and Caitlin, just get back to us with a solid date on the timing, just so that we can make sure that our dates for the next meeting will work to review the financials, and that we've got, we've got the right time frame scheduled to be able to do that. That would be helpful. And if there's anything, if pension and OPEB, I know those have traditionally held us up, but if there's anything we can do to nudge whoever we need to nudge to get that information sooner rather than later, that would be helpful. All right. So the next item on the agenda, I see someone else is on the call. I don't know if that is Jared on.
Yes, you should be.
Okay. Jared, are you there? Okay, the next item was to get an update on the progress on the DPW audit findings. Connie was not able to be with us tonight, and I think Jared had indicated he was going to give us that update.
I'm on.
Oh, hi, Jared.
Sorry, I was trying to unmute with my microphone. I had to go to the number keys and do it. So I'm good now.
No worries. Thanks for joining us. Do you want to give us just a brief update on the progress on the DPW audit report and maybe focus on any additional items? And we don't have any backup. We didn't get any backup for this, but maybe just take us through any additional items that were closed out since our last meeting.
Sure. Yep, I will. Yeah, let me go through a few things here. I'm just going to work off of a report that Connie did. So I'm pinch hitting for her, and I'll do my best, and off we go. So there were, some of this is kind of review, but there were 76 findings and recommendations in the audit. 42 are fully implemented, and 6 were deemed not applicable. 28 are partially complete and are in progress at this time. Of the 28 in progress, 17 directly relate to the new purchasing policy. So once we have the purchasing policy addressed, assuming that these are become part of it, make it into it in some way, that those would satisfy the need to implement those changes as well. We have 2 newly closed items in our solid waste and recycling facility. We implemented a credit card system there. This started in September, and that's for both for the residents and for the haulers that we're accepting credit cards. We've got another one which we're really excited about and have been pushing for since at least since Brenda took over. But we hired a grant coordinator part-time for now, and she has been great and done a great amount of work. We're trying to, you know, as much as we can, have her kind of lay the groundwork for the position. So, you know, going in and organizing documents that we have, taking inventory of the grants that are out there that we typically get in a year, in addition to trying to go after other grants and, you know, pursuing those. She's also, she comes from a compliance background, so she's very well versed in that, and will be that will be part of her function as well, the compliance and reporting part of any of the grants that the town gets. So we're psyched about that. It's going to be great and a great asset to the town. We have some remaining open in progress items. The Munis training our department conducted Munis training back in September. I said back in September, last month, and we're doing another Munis training in November. We are DPW, as you know, which this is part of the audit as well, was to hire a new financial analyst. And so DPW, we're putting that analyst under DPW. They have, they sent out the job description, posted it. We've gotten responses. It's a very difficult market right now for finding people. And, but we're they're reviewing resumes and hoping to fill that position as soon as possible. And that's going to be a very important position as well for us when, with all the different projects that we have on the horizon. It would be great to get somebody in there who can really focus on the financial aspect of those projects. DPW is also looking at a asset management plus as a replacement for our Q alert system. They're evaluating the maintenance cost of this is $40,000 a year. And so they're still evaluating it, and haven't made a decision whether or not to go with that. In the meantime, the current system, the Q alert system, is satisfying all of our needs. The townwide permitted system. So as you know, we've decided to make the focus appropriately so on our building department. We have a new director of the building department, and we're expecting to go live in the building department next month in November with the permitting system and taking credit cards online. And so from there, we'll continue to expand out into other departments with the hope of having everything implemented by the spring of 2022. We are still working our way through a time and attendance, either module or a new system for our HR department. And we're continuing to evaluate different software that's out there, and then to go to RFP to find the right one. And finally, our DPW director did an RFP for a road management, pavement management system and pavement analysis system. And they have selected someone. They've awarded the bid to the Beta Group. Again, this is something that we're really excited about because it's going to give us unintended a roadmap for how to proceed with our paving. Hopefully, taking some of the politics out of the process so that we can get more done based on the actual needs of the roads and prioritization of the roads. And so we expect to hear more about that next month and to get a sense of what the cost is, what the immediate needs are, and then what we'll need to, what we should be doing every year in order to keep them up to a certain level of repair. So that's what I have for Connie's report.
All right, thank you. Thanks for pinch hitting for Connie. That was a really helpful update. Mary, do you have any questions on anything you heard?
I don't think so. I think Jared was pretty thorough.
All right, agree. Thank you, Jared. One quick question. What's the name of the individual that we hired as the grant coordinator?
Her name is Teresa Brown.
Okay.
She's a Fairfield resident. Recently moved from Bridgeport.
Okay, terrific. Thank you again for providing the update. I think, unfortunately, our Jim Brown, who our chair of the Board of Finance is, and part of this committee couldn't be here this evening, but I'll speak to him to see if we can get this item on an agenda for a Board of Finance meeting in the near term. I think everybody'd be interested in hearing the progress and where we stand on all these recommendations. And maybe for that purpose, we could get Connie to kind of update the matrix so we can all see the items that have been closed out. And at that point, we can also cross-reference the purchasing policy recommendations to the actual draft policy. So thank you again for that.
Ms. Charlton?
You're welcome.
Mr. DeWitt?
Hi, we do have a quarterly meeting coming up in, I believe it's the 16th. The 9th our waterfall and the 16th our quarterly meeting. So maybe we could slip it in the agenda there. That will be the last meeting of this board as it is composed of today. So if you wanted to be the next board after the, after the election, it would have to be our December meeting.
Okay. All right, let me
Just let me know. I can work that with Ms. Carpenter and Mr. Brown for you.
Yeah, terrific. All right. All right. Moving on to item 4 on our agenda is to hear and discuss the draft of the purchasing policy that has been put together or coordinated by Mr. Santafanti's firm with the assistance, of course, of our purchasing department in the town and the leadership. So Joe, I'd like to turn this over to you, and this is obviously a lengthy policy. I don't know how you want to walk through it with us, but what would be, I think, helpful, unless anyone has other suggestions, is to maybe focus on your process overall and really focus on what's changing here. What's new in this policy or different in terms of thresholds, et cetera. What are the open items? And to the extent we have new items or changed items, maybe you could quickly take us through the thought process around those. So I'll turn it over to you.
So I'm just gonna kind of big picture and then I'll circle back to some of that. So just get a chance to look at the policy. I guess what I looked at, again, more just the structure was just confusing to me, like where somebody had to go to learn what they needed to go. So I kind of restructured in that the beginning part is kind of the purchasing department's policies, procedures, general information about purchasing and that. Then the next section kind of is really what do the town departments need to pay attention to, and then the third part was kind of what does the vendor need to know, which is kind of the end, section 7, and that type of thing. And then there's a lot of exhibits, and again I focus that on here's the town charter, here's the town forms, here's the state and federal regulations, and then here's a lot of the vendor required forms. So just trying to make it so somebody who had to use it could go to the specific area, because there was a lot of information integrated throughout. And I did part of the process too was to take out all the accounting policies, because this really is a purchasing policy, and how an encumbrance is done or how bills get paid. That's an accounting thing. It doesn't really need to be part. Purchasing just needs to take it to where they approve the PO, and then after that, finance would take over with the regular internal controls. So I did remove a lot of the accounting policy related things that were in there. So part of the process was just kind of to try to make some of the consistent language, and then there are sections like within, we'll say, the department where purchasing department has responsibilities. So again, I just tried to make responsibilities clear in the beginning, and then within the process, purchasing department's going to do this, they're going to develop specs, so they're going to chase this, the user department's responsible to do this. So again, trying to make it more user friendly, that somebody knew exactly what they had to do. And some of the other things, it was just some of the paragraphs were just, to me, and again, part of it is my preference, I don't like big block paragraphs, so I kind of formatting just made things bullets so you can kind of get through it a little bit quicker. And there were a few items just turned into charts, like the bid threshold, and we can look at that a little bit. Most of the blue in there is kind of something that I probably recommended in that first thing that should be put in. So I tried to hide, it's not 100%, but the blue sections are probably the more significant new sections. And there's one I left blue that really was yellow. Yellow in there is more like I'm questioning is that the right number? Or there are a couple editorial comments in there, such as like I left it in because it was in the policy that, you know, a fining a department head for not following the policy. I don't believe that that should be in there, but I left it for you to decide if you wanted to leave that. And I'm not sure, again, legally, if you can find an employee for not following the policy. So I said, you know, town attorney might need to investigate that, but that's not a normal thing. And $100 fine isn't really gonna impact anybody. If you're gonna have a fine to change behavior, it has to be more like $1,000, in my opinion. $100 is not really gonna impact very many people. One of the open items is I didn't reconcile the terms and conditions. I made a lot of changes to the vendor section because it was more just kind of organizing and putting it in more of the flow. That was the other part of some of the formatting changes, which is to put it in the logical order it occurs versus it wasn't always in that order. So I didn't reconcile that to the terms and conditions. And so section 7 is mostly the vendor, and the terms and conditions that are in the back in the exhibit, I didn't actually map those two yet. And I think the other thing, I recommended a new vendor form. I didn't have a sample. I certainly can develop one, or if the town wants to develop one. And I didn't have a contract sample, which is normally standard part of, you know, certain bids. They're like, here's the sample contract in case somebody has any questions or issues. So I don't know if the town has one. It wasn't in the other policies, so I didn't develop one in case the town has one already, or if that's something town attorney wants to develop. The other thing that was a little confusing to me, and I think it's in defined terms, there's a lot of definitions, is purchasing department versus purchasing authority. So I tried, when I went through that, if I felt that the purchasing authority being both the purchasing department and the first selectman, that if it was something really wanted more than one person involved with, that the words in purchasing authority, it was something more, I'm going to call it clerical or purchasing related, that the purchasing department could do A, B, and C. But if it was a decision, I felt that the authority, or even more than the authority, there should be more than one person making a decision on a bid waiver or exceptions or that type of thing. So those words are something to pay attention to see if it makes sense to you, is department versus authority, how that's used. Just flipping through it tonight, I think I might, you know, section 8, I think I want to move that to right after section 6. If you look at the table of contents, which was really requisitions, so that the last section would be vendors, because then it would follow the logic of purchasing department, town department, and then vendor. So section 8, I think, is better placed right after 6. So that's something I can do. Almost all the forms in there were converted to Excel just for, I think, ease of use. And just I find that easier than Word documents and try to manage typing in those. So you'll see that they're kind of pasted in there. So the manual shows what it looks like, but I do have all those in Excel, so that I provide that too, so that departments can just kind of type them in the Excel document and do that. Yeah, there's a, the transparency part of it, there's a lot of improvements in there, including posting to the website, which is kind of more the new norm. Is like everything gets posted to the website, both of the bid results and the RFPs. So one of the other things that I did do, just from my experience and how things flow and from a monitoring and making sure things get done, there was certain things in the old policy or the draft policy that said the department will chase the W-9. The department is responsible to make sure they have updated insurance certificates. And, you know, most of the time that's done through purchasing, and I find that they're asking me to update my insurance or this. It's not, so we want to leave that to the department. So also new vendor approval, which I'm not sure if that's in purchasing or not. I didn't confirm that, but I do think it's important that purchasing is doing that and not leaving it to departments, because they tend to get busy and not do that administrative. And I think you need someone to monitor, and I think that has to be purchasing. So that may, depending on what shifts here and there, it may impact the need for resources in that department if they're really going to manage it and monitor this. So, that will kind of play out over time as some of these other things change if there's some efficiencies. But so I know when they go look at that, they'll see I did make it the responsibility of the purchasing department for some of those items. So that's kind of the big picture. Again, the thresholds that are in here are, kind of in line with most towns the size of Fairfield. So I left in there what was there. 25,000 is kind of a very common number. I still do. I'm looking at page 19. Not sure about if they seem to be town thresholds. The 10,000 for franchise and concessions and the 5,000 for real property leases. I'm not sure if those numbers should be different than the regular purchasing policies. So, but that would be something for the board, to evaluate. So yeah, I think those again were the highlights. If you wanted to look at some of what, I guess we can go through a lot of the newer sections are kind of in the front, just kind of framing out purchasing and how the department's going to function. So on page 9, the related town policies, endorsements, samples, and procure for services for personal use. Those are just, kind of the best practices, but they weren't specifically referenced in the other policies. So again, just communicating that these type of things shouldn't be done. And then I think it was in there in a format, but I made it more explicit on the top of page 10, just the compliance with purchasing policy that anyone who's approving POs should, I think the town should require that they sign off, that they read this and understand what their responsibilities are. So it was in there, but I pulled it out and made it a separate section. So I don't know if I didn't develop that form. So there's a note form to document that. Some simple that they read it. And on the bottom of page 10, I think that one should be yellow. The blue there, again, that's the fine. I don't think that's necessary, but I didn't want to just take that out. I figured I would let some discussion happen and the committee decide if they wanted to have a fine. And again, I don't see that type of thing. So I don't know if that's legal. So I just said town attorney might need, if you want to leave that in, to review that. So again, in the back, and here I just kind of reference all the different the current town charter, town code, all the sections that are applicable. I also list the fraud policy that the town adopted, because it does relate to purchasing conceptually. All the details of that are in Exhibit 1. So that lists all the full text of all these policies, but here's just stating that everything is going to be done in accordance with these policies unless it's been changed. So the insurance certificates on page 14. So again, I put that the purchasing department is going to make sure they get the insurance and then maintain the schedule and then ask for updates. The purchasing policy, the draft already said they were going to monitor the bid security and that type of thing and the performance bonds. So this part makes sense that they would manage all the insurance and make sure versus just textbook purchasing is that they should control new vendors and everything should kind of flow through that department. Nobody likes doing that, but that's the best control that purchasing adds new vendors to the system. And part of that would be making sure there's a W-9 on file. I expanded, the town has a section on surplus property. So on page 15, I just added some detailed procedures that was in another policy that how disposition would happen and some other specific considerations of how it would be done. The town's ordinance is pretty general, didn't really have the procedures. So I added those procedures to have something in section 10 on page 16, the town responsibilities, again, there was some of that in various sections, so I just kind of pulled it all together of what we're expecting the town departments, the user departments to do. As far as getting information and making sure requisitions are done on time, reporting any problems and that type of thing. Like H, not to split purchase orders, so it's explicit in here as, you know, not trying to manage the requirements, if that's something that would be expected. And then, so that's kind of section 1, which just kind of frames out everything, and then starting section 2 is kind of more the specific, you know, I call it department policies and procedures, the section that the departments would need to know what they need to do, what the thresholds are, what the different types of bids are. So I just kind of broke it out. Again, I used the thresholds that were there, which are, you know, probably the most common. So they should be in yellow for your consideration. Let's talk about the others. So it's kind of walks through that structure. On page 21, item G, department responsibilities, you know, communicating to purchasing. I put November 1. I think I changed the date to November 1, so it'd be in advance of the budget process if that potentially had an impact. And just getting information, your purchasing agent or purchasing department, what they think they may need for commodities and that type of thing, so the bid process can be ahead of the new budget. I'm referencing in H that the state and federal, so the big one is the federal uniform guidance. So under the uniform guidance rules, that the town has to have a specific policy, and it's multiple pages in the appendix, and it's kind of word for word right out of the uniform guidance of what the thresholds are. And if you're spending federal money, there's really zero flexibility. One, you have to have the policy, or else that would be a finding. And secondly, there's certain things you're not allowed to do, like the local preference option is not allowable if you're using federal funds. So you have to, you know, anything for the ARPA money or bridges or anything federal, you basically have to deviate a little bit from the policy and make sure you're following the purchasing requirements under federal, for a federal grant. Let's see. So again, it talks about in section 4, exceptions and exemptions. I did, you know, on page 29, it's, you know, highlighted in yellow there. I left this in because I don't know what it means. In the event of opening the town's emergency center EOC, the town shall follow the procedures and regulations for purchasing, established, and maintained at the town's EOC. I don't know if you have any procedures. I don't know what that means. Normally, if I realize that's joint, but I don't know why it would be any different conceptually than the town's policy. So I left it in because it
Shouldn't be.
why that got in there, but I just highlighted it because I'm not sure. I didn't really get clarification on that.
Yeah, I agree. I'm not sure why that would be different than, different than the procedures we've set out for other types of emergencies. As it relates.
It's not, and it's not a self-sustaining entity, or is it? I don't know if it's supposed to be when it's completely in place. But I don't know that would change the need for this anyway.
Yeah, so I mean, I would propose taking it out, which is why I highlighted it, but I left it in for you to evaluate and, you know, agree or not as far as that. So the different types of purchases, the exceptions with the sole source or single source, utilities, town's policy on page 31 of the maintenance, repair, and operations. So that, again, that local preference program, that's okay for non-federal, but you know what the process is for that. Consulting agreements or professional services, I just combined those sections because it was a little bit repetitive. They're really kind of most professional services, not all, but consulting is the same. So the statement just says that it's the same as any other professional service. So on page 34, I thought this gives the town a little bit of flexibility. It was in some other towns, just if you need to extend a service contract, as long as it's within, and the number in their policy was 3%, then you could do that on a short-term basis. So I guess that just gave flexibility if needed. But that's for consideration. So then page 37, so I tried to be a little bit more clear on what some of the exemptions from the purchasing policy would be. And some of these were out of the policy, and then I kind of expanded it a little bit. So the legal services, investment managers, insurance, I think that was in the original policy. I think I added the surplus. Purchases related to special education, broke out some specific items. Again, the Board of Ed may have some other thoughts on that, but at least those are the ones that are most obvious to me, and things that I don't normally. I'm testing for bids, you know, when we're doing our normal audit work that we do. And I listed some purchases for regular education that would be exempt, because if you have this textbook, you're going to continue to use that textbook. If there's something specific with the curriculum, then you're going to stick with it. So textbooks, periodicals, copyrighted, specific learning tools, the cafeteria operations. We talked about that, and that needs to be bid in accordance with state statutes, which I think is every 5 years.
If I may, because I had a question on this section. Is it your intention that this section lists every exemption from public bidding in here? And even if we thought we knew all of them, because I'm sure we're forgetting some, should we have something in here that says how we can go about adding something to this policy as an exemption?
Yes, because there's no way to guess, you know, to know all of them, and things always come up. So yeah, we can, that's a good point to add something to that how would something get added to the list, or is it a one-time? So, I mean, the bid waiver is the way to do that. So, but if it's something that's recurring,
Right.
the list, I guess, yeah, who would approve adding it to the list?
Yeah, and I thought the same thing. You know, listen, I like the single source, I like the sole source, I like the bid waiver. It kind of feels like we've captured all the things that were not in there before, because those were 3 of my big points the last time. And maybe that and section 4.2 covers it all. Again, I was just questioning, you know, if that was your thought, because I kind of do think we've covered 99% of it with those, you know, 4 topics, right?
Right. I think this was just kind of giving some guidance to some stuff that will just go, you know, right through. The requisition would be approved without bidding, just because it relates to these things. So I think it was just kind of framing out some of the things that were getting slowed down a little bit, but
Yeah.
we can put.
No, this list, I like the list. I like the list of exemptions, and I can totally understand where you came up with that list. I was just curious if you thought that there was some process needed for adding or subtracting those exemptions, but I don't want to belabor your review. So
Let me jump in. I think this is an important point that Mr. DeWitt is making. I mean, I think this should be a comprehensive list. I mean, one of the things that I think it's still in here in some places, which I have some detailed questions, which I may forward on separately, but you know, I know in the original draft policy, you know, there were statements in there that, you know, basically we could waive bidding for, you know, if deemed necessary, or, you know, at the sole discretion of the town, which
Right.
effectively left it wide open. And to me, that's inappropriate. I mean, I think if this list is not a complete list, you know, all the stakeholders should be reviewing this. And if there's recurring stuff that ought to go in this section, it should be in the section. And if it's truly something, if something comes up that's truly different or a one-time item, I think there are other provisions of the policy, whether it be emergency, you know, authorizations and things like that, that should cover it. But personally, I think having this be clear and removing, some of the more ambiguous language, which I think is still in here in a couple of places of, anything can be done as long as it's in the best interest of the town.
Yeah, right.
That is not okay, in my opinion, because that to me is no policy at all. So, again, I like the list, and this would be to me an important section to get comments from the stakeholders at the town and at the Board of Education to make sure that we've got it right. And that if something needs to be added, it makes sense. And it's a recurring item that should be added because of, just the way the town does business. And I think special education is a good example of that, which you've included here.
Yeah.
So I like this. The only other thing I would suggest on this, Joe, and again, I'll probably forward a separate list of questions and comments because I don't want to keep us here all night. But I think it would be helpful to consistently under the description, if it's not subject to bid requirements, explicitly state who's responsible for approving these services. So for example, on legal services, you stated who's responsible for hiring legal services. For investment managers, I believe that's under the authority of the Joint Retirement and Investment Board, but
Right.
in any case, I think that ought to be in here. Insurance, we don't really say who's responsible. So anything that's on here, I think it should be clear who, in fact, if it's exempt from public bidding, who has authority over that process. But again, I think the list is a good one, and it should be something that, the department's focused on to make sure we've got it right. Anyway, sorry to jump in there, but if you want to
Can I jump in with a quick question? Because I wasn't sure what it meant for the bus contracts, that it follows the state bidding, because that's something that used to come to us on a regular basis because they used to ask us to waive the bid process. So that gives them the ability to bid it using the state requirements. Is that?
I think, and I guess can clarify, I think the state requires that is bid every 3 years. So the state, for both cafeteria and bus, Department of Ed actually said you must bid this stuff. So that was just clarification. It still should be bid and still should follow the town policy, but the state Department of Ed does have some rules around that. So I was saying it should be bid, but in accordance with that, just to be clear, it's not really an exemption. So I don't know if it's confusing to be there or it should be labeled separately, but I think it was based upon a discussion that there was questions around this, but there are statute or Department of Ed does have guidelines or requirements of when that is bid.
So if the state is effectively overrides or so if it has to be done in accordance with the state process, we're not going to create a town process to try to mirror it because that doesn't make sense and the state process may change. So this is effectively meaning to just refer to the state requirement, or in the case of special ed, mandate, whatever the case might be. Is that fair?
Well, I thought Joe was saying that was in addition to whatever our requirement was.
I think the requirements are more based upon the number of years. That's the most significant thing I guess I'm referring to. And I think one's cafeterias every 5, and I think buses every 3. So, but it's saying you have to bid it. It's not a specific thing that you have to do other than you have to bid it. You can't just decide I'm not going out to bid for buses for 10 years. So
Right, the state mandates how long. The only reason we ever got involved was because they wanted to, just go with a single. They wanted to eliminate the bid process,
right?
Which could potentially be covered under either a single source or sole source, or I guess a bid waiver. But we've traditionally not let them, not go out for an RFP for competition.
Right.
you can think about it. I don't know if you want me to separate.
So, yeah, so the way I read it, then it's not really an exemption, it's just an additional requirement, right?
Right, correct.
Well, maybe yeah, Mary, I think it's an exemption in a way, right? Because I mean, if you're only bidding every 3 years or 5 years versus you're having to go out to bid based on a new contract at a certain dollar amount. Maybe Joe, you could just clarify because some of the town's process will apply, but maybe you can clarify what's, the state has, minimum requirements effectively, right? And I don't think from a Board of Ed perspective, they're interested in, exceeding that. I mean, we're not going to go out for a bus contract every year, for example, right? So I think that's the intent, is to try and make sure that we're not writing a policy that, kind of conflicts with what the state process is. And maybe that can just be spelled out a little more under that detailed description column.
Okay, yep.
Because Mary, I hear what you're saying. It's not really an exemption, but I'm not sure if it needs a separate category or not. Maybe we could just handle it by being more specific about what's different about curricula, cafeteria operations, and bus contracts.
Right.
Right, because this is my first read of it, and so that's why it was jumping out at me. Why are they exempt? But they're not really. It's just additional, like, to
It's a
me, it's just
guideline.
there's this another requirement they have to follow.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, yep, I can do that. I think on page 39, I just added the section to waiver of defects. That's kind of, I see that a lot, just if there's something wrong with the bid, the town can decide to do it. Makes sense. All right, and then contracts, again, I think at some point there should be that sample contract that's attached in the exhibits. So this is what the policy says it should deal with. So this is what was in the other policy. I didn't really change that. So the sample contract should address those items at least.
And I agree with you, Joe, that section 8 should come before section 6, because that makes more sense in the logical order of that whole thing.
Okay, yep, yeah, it didn't strike me until 10 minutes before. I was like, oh. I was trying to label my 3 sections. I was like, wait a minute, that's a town section, doesn't belong.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. And then the vendor information, again, this was just best practice. Most of this was in there. I think I reorganized it again to be more logical in the order that it would get done. So the vendor wants to understand how the town does business and what they have to pay attention to and that type of thing. That this kind of walks through that. There's almost 40 items. There's a lot of information, but it kind of is most of this is what I see as far as standard and what you need for bid security and what you need for insurance and performance bonds. And
So all the yellows, as you said before, we need to tweak that as a municipality, right? And figure out what those levels are going to be. So yeah, that's what I thought.
right. All right, so that's section 7 and 8. We'll move again. I just touched on the minimum, the high level of purchase orders, what purchase was doing, and not really getting into the accounting after that. Okay, another blank page, right? And then section 9 again. That's all the exhibits. Again, what the town charter as a reference, all the town forms. Which should include placeholder for the contract, but then there's some forms, just a big tally sheet to formalize the way the policy is written, it's signed off, and then a big checklist. So that's make sure that the bid is compliant with the requirements, just have some way to kind of standardize the review and documentation of that. The federal uniform guidance, I mentioned the state requirements for construction and pre-qualification and prevailing wages, and then a bunch of different. So J is the one I didn't really map back to section 7. I have to take a look at that. but the insurance was what was there, which looks pretty standard from what I see. The exemptions RFP form, just a lot of RFPs, like if you have any exemptions, you're not agreeing to everything, tell us what you're not agreeing to. But so this is the wrong page, so I think this needs to be updated. Proposal guarantees and warranties, it's kind of a standard thing. The non-collusion, we put the delinquent tax, someone needs to verify that, especially for all those local vendors, that they're not delinquent, not being on the state or federal department listing, just non-discrimination, certification, the legal status, the living wage certification. I saw that one other proposal. I think that's a specific ordinance. You probably don't have that, so I'm not sure if that's something you want to consider, or I can that will need to come out, because I think what I saw was a local ordinance that had that provision. And then in the back, there's a lot of definitions. So I tried to map the definitions to what was there, and what I was trying to do, if it was a bold, if the term is used, to try to bold it. I don't know if it's 100% right now, but just kind of was a bold term that would tell the reader that there's a definition in the back. So
listen, I love all the backup. I think the backup's amazing. But my one concern with any backup and any reference that copies an existing document is that it changes. So we reference, for example, I'm on page 89, right? General Statutes 3152A and 3152B. You know, there's references all through the background, which there should be. Do we absolutely want to include the words on those two general statutes, or do we just want to reference people to them? Because again, we published this on December 1st, and December 2nd, they changed General Statute 3152A, and then, you know, our documents, you know, out of date.
yeah, that's a good point, because there's a lot of time that would be spent administratively trying to update it versus saying the discrimination in accordance with that state statute. I know I can go look it up pretty easily. So if it's the person submitting the bid, same with the definition of professional service, that was just pulled out of the statutes that was there, but I don't know that that's necessary. It could just be a list. It doesn't have to reference a statute, just to, again, to give perspective of what's considered professional service, but
Yeah.
it is better to not put the statute, but just put the reference.
See, I like all the forms, all of the forms that you have in here, the bid sheet and all. I love all that stuff, because those documents should certainly be controlled by the purchasing department. And having a reference to that physical document in here, I think, is very important. Again, I'm concerned, you know, because dealing with other policies in the, you know, in the outside world, if you reference, you know, a federal standard or federal guidance, and that guidance changed, you'd be changing this policy every day, keeping updates. And the other thing is, we reference the charter a lot, and we should, and we're in a charter revision right now. So, you know, it's pretty sure something's going to change in that charter that might cause a revision here. So, I mean, we can discuss this obviously with the other organizations within the town, but I would be more inclined to recommend a reference to a document rather than, you know, actually referencing specific words inside of a statute or regulation or something like that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with Mr. DeWitt's comments. I think that's really important, because we don't want a lot of conflicting stuff in the future. As far as other things, you know, like a potential charter revision, you know, I think we've just got to move forward with this. And to the extent the charter revision ends up changing requirements or responsibilities, then this policy will just have to get amended. I mean, obviously, you know, that may happen.
Oh, believe me, I'm not recommending holding this back.
Right.
Somebody
Oh,
for the
no,
charter
I
commission.
know you, I know you're not.
I'm just saying that if we're referencing, charter revision paragraph 99.2 might go away.
Absolutely.
But it's
So
better
I
to
think-
change it.
Yeah, so I think what'll happen is when the charter, to the extent the charter is modified, then that's gonna, this policy will have to be modified to conform with it. And there shouldn't be a ton of changes because, but there may be some key things, whether it be, approval or what the Board of Selectmen has to approve or, whatever it might be.
The levels,
Yeah, the levels that may change. So,
Right.
so that's fine. But on those things, I think it is helpful to reference the current, because the charter doesn't change that often. So if levels change as a result of the charter revision, I think that's one where it's still useful to put the levels in here. And
Absolutely.
those can change. But to your point about state statutes, I would agree with that. Joe, first of all, just to step back for a minute, I want to thank you for, the work that you put into this. I think the big takeaway for those who need to go through this and review it, including, town management and others, is to focus on a couple of things. So one, the items that you've highlighted in blue are effectively new. So basically you went through a process of taking the policy, reorganizing it and putting it in a more logical format, reducing redundancies, taking out accounting policies, et cetera. So that part's good. And I know there was a lot of work there, but the items highlighted in blue are new. And so they're things that have been added. So that's important to focus on for everyone. Secondly, what's highlighted in yellow, those are either open items or questions. And from how you've described some of them, things that you saw in there that, at least in your, your initial opinion of those, maybe don't make a lot of sense. One thing specifically is, fining town employees who break a policy $100. I would agree with you. I think, violating town policies is a serious employment matter. I don't think you resolve it by fining someone $100. I think that's that's an issue in terms of performance management that needs to be addressed. And, and whatever that means. I mean, that in some cases might be grounds for termination with cause, I don't know. It depends on how serious it is, but I would agree with you that I don't think the mechanism is fining somebody. And I can't believe we would ever do that anyway. So, thank you for highlighting some of those items because those I think, need to get looked at. I had a couple of broader questions, and as I said, I have some detailed ones that I'll forward, but I did have a couple of broader ones, and maybe we could just talk about those. And if anybody else wants to jump in, please do. At the beginning of the policy, on page 8. We talk about the purchasing code of ethics and we refer to the town's code of ethics. I will be honest, I'm not that familiar with the town's code of ethics. I don't know when it was updated. I don't know how it gets communicated to new and existing employees, if people are really familiar with it. If it's something, because that's inherent in a lot of what, what gets talked about in here. So to the extent that, I guess in your opinion, how dependent is this on the town's code of ethics? Or do you feel that what's in the town code of ethics is sort of, built into this anyway, or reiterated in some fashion in this policy anyway?
I think it is in there. I just referred to it because it's something additional. So that's why I made this separate purchasing code of ethics, just to kind of highlight how it impacts that. But everyone, whether it be purchasing or not, would be subject to the town's code of ethics.
Okay. One suggestion in terms of, and maybe it's in the charter, but you pointed out that you talk about the purchasing authority versus the purchasing department. And I wonder if it might be worthwhile to, either in the list of definitions or somewhere to just clarify what that means, because as I read that, I wasn't, until you pointed it out, I didn't pick up on the real distinction that you were trying to draw there and what that means. So if the purchasing authority is meant to include the first select person, as well as the head of purchasing or the chief administrative officer, chief fiscal, whoever it might be, I think we have to be, clear, clearer, because that's, I think that's pretty important based on what you told us.
All right, so yeah, because that's based upon the charter, but I can put that up front, so it's
Right.
making.
Just so it's clear, because if it requires purchasing authority, then it's clearly something pretty significant. And so I just,
That is a major,
from a reader's perspective or people that
Right.
are using this policy, I think there might be confusion between those two terms. And so I think making that explicit would be helpful.
yeah, I agree.
One of the things too, I've got in the back of my mind is rolling something like this out, and training on it. And I think from that standpoint, we're really going to need, and I don't know who's going to somebody's got to put this together, but I think we really do need a succinct summary of changes and highlights of this policy, because again, I think anyone that's involved in the process, whether at the department level, purchasing department, finance, it's going to be important that they understand kind of what's changing here.
Sorry, so revising from what, the current policy?
Yeah, so I mean, we've got this draft here where we've got highlights in blue and we've got things in yellow that might change.
Yeah.
But as this policy is finalized, I think it's going to be important to memorialize in a very clear fashion, whether it's a chart or a matrix, kind of what's new. Because as this gets rolled out and people are trained on the new policy, I think it should be very clear that if, this is what we've been doing, for the past 10 years, this is what's changing, or here's what's new that we have to pay attention to. So
Yeah, I agree. I also had sent Joe a quick note late in the day. So, but I think we really do need a final matrix, audit to policy matrix to make sure we've checked all the, the audit boxes too. And I was going to recommend, and I apologize, I have an 8:30 hard stop or 8:35, whatever, but I was also going to recommend that maybe we, Laura, you have some recommendations to send in. I have some specific I'll send. I think after those are made, we should release this draft, if you will. This becomes the baseline, and then start this process of iterating one document, because, again, we don't want 20 versions of this out there. We want one released draft, if you will, and then start the iteration process with the teams.
I think that's a really important point. Agree. And I know the Board of Finance members had indicated that they wanted adequate time to look at it. So I think anything quick here, we do need to get, we do need to get incorporated so that we have one working draft that all changes will be
Right.
tracked against. And I'm just trying to flip through my notes here. I have a lot of questions, not a lot, but I have a fair number of questions and comments on small items, but I'm just flipping here quickly to see if there's anything that I wanted to ask on the call. If anybody else has any questions, please jump in. I think, part of where I had just questions is I wanted some clarity around, there are sections in here about, approved vendor lists and, local vendors and stuff like that. And I think just taking a cold read of this, that was a little bit confusing to me. I wasn't really clear what the significance was of a vendor being on our approved list. Does that mean something vis-a-vis bidding procedures or quoting procedures? It's just not clear. And so, you don't have to answer that now, Joe, but I just, there were some things like that, even in the bidding section, wasn't really clear that, the expectation was to go for a low bid unless certain conditions are present. I mean, so there were just a few things that I thought might be helpful to just clarify. I also thought.
That speaks, if I may,
Yeah,
Mr.
sure.
Open, that speaks to the Board of Ed's concern, right? So we've got some very specific special ed educators that, there's only like 3 people in the whole state that can do this kind of stuff. And they wanted and I had mentioned to them, a kind of a, not preferred vendor list, but a specific vendor list where we don't have to go out to 10 people for bid. And by the way, if we have 3 people on the approved list and 2 people are like, I'm going to no bid this, then it becomes a sole source bid. So that is very important to the Board of Ed. And I think there's probably a lot more cases of this that we just haven't, found yet.
Yeah, and you probably some of that on the town side too. Again, I think there were some of these sections that were related, and I read them, and I just I wasn't clear on the context, examples of when some of this might come into play. So I'll forward those types of questions to Joe. And again, I think, some of these things, one thing I'll point out on page 18, it says here, so I'm on page 18, the 3rd bullet under 2.1. We have a statement in here: the purchasing authority may waive the requirement to obtain competitive quotes for any reason if it is in the town benefit. That kind of stuff, I just, I don't understand. Like, I just think that's something that's so broad that we really should specify, some context around that. I don't think it's helpful to leave that wide open, because that a sentence like that sort of overrides the whole policy that you have. We also talked a little bit about back and forth, I think, in previous meetings around thresholds for purchases and thresholds for approvals, whether they be, quotes or bids, et cetera. And, with the changes that are proposed, how much coverage are we going to get on the town money that's spent? So, I don't know what that looks like. If our quote requirements go up, are we still covering and I think there's general agreement that they need to, are we still going to be covering an adequate level of the dollars that the town spends? So that was just something general. I don't, again, I'll forward some more specific, questions on some of these items, but, I think for everyone, and particularly on the town side, these items in yellow probably need to get addressed quickly. And I think we should probably have a date in mind, to Mr. DeWitt's point on when we can get, sort of a final working draft, if you will, for distribution. So, Joe, what, from your standpoint, these items in yellow, how are you expecting to get these answered? Do you want responses from us, the town? I mean, do you have to talk to somebody? Are you waiting on an answer? What's the status of those items? Have you asked these questions previously, or are we just hearing about them tonight?
Well, I mean, anything that's a number, I'm leaving that up to the board, and I'm not making that decision. So,
Right.
I
mean, are these questions that have been put out there to the town and you're waiting on answers for, or is these just open items at this point?
I think they're open items. I mean, there's a couple of things like, I don't know, we're referencing a specific place on the town's network. I don't know if that needs to be in the policy. So it's kind of a variety of different things. So, most of it is around anything where there's a number. Otherwise, usually I put a note, like I don't know why this is here. Even on one of the forms, it has a specific employee. I don't know if you want.
Okay.
And there, like we were saying, it was send it to this person. So
Yeah, there's a reference in there to a junior purchasing person. you know, all correspondence should go to the purchasing director of the town of Fairfield, Connecticut. And it should be a generic email. It can't be cdewitt@fairfield.ct, right? Because C. DeWitt could quit next week. It's got to go to a centralized, you know, I'm sure well, I was just going to say, I'm sure we have a separate mailbox for just bids, but I shouldn't say that. But we should have something that we have current, you know, constant correspondence trail if someone leaves the town or retires or anything, right?
Yep.
Yeah,
Okay, we're coming up on, I think, I know Mr. DeWitt has a hard stop here in a few minutes. So in terms of next steps, what I'll suggest is that, you know, if the committee members could, you know, send any additional questions or comments to Mr. Centofanti within the next day or two, that would be helpful. And I think from the town's perspective, obviously everybody needs adequate time to review this. I don't know if Jared, are you still on? He's muted. I do think, you know, from kind of Jared, Caitlin,
I'm still on here.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think, what do you think is a reasonable time frame, Jared, to get back, you know, a first set of comments or response on some of these highlighted items to Joe, so that we
You know,
can-
honestly, I couldn't tell you. I think we'll have to look at it and get our team together and look at this. We just got this morning, so I'm not sure Gerald has even had a chance to look at it. I know I haven't. So we got to all get together and we'd have to figure that out. Maybe we can follow up and figure that out.
Okay.
Yeah, and I reached
don't know what
and I
to say at
reached
this
out to
point.
Tom Bremer today for that same kind of thing. I said, listen, what do you think a legitimate time frame is for us to have this conversation? So you know, I'll certainly follow up on that with him. I think I get the feeling Tom wants to be like the conduit maybe for the communications of the you know, the reviews, which is fine by me except for the board. But as far as the town's concerned, you know, we need somebody to honcho it, I think, right?
Yeah, we do. And however we want to do that, it's fine. I think I would just say that I know that this looks a little overwhelming. Obviously, there's a lot of pages here, but most of this is, you know, from, you know, I mean, Joe didn't take this and just create something from scratch. You know, I think he modified the town's policy in ways that are highlighted here, and most of the rest of it is just reorganization. So I think having, you know, focusing on what's highlighted here, the new items in blue, you know, the questions that are in yellow, again, which are all from existing policy. This shouldn't be too overwhelming to review. And I think, you know, we should try to, you know, you know, do it as soon as it's practical. But Jared will, you know, certainly understand that everyone's got, you know, other priorities. And so we'll wait to hear back from you or Tom or whoever the appropriate person is. But in the meantime, you know, the committee members, I think, can separately send the questions to Joe. And
Yeah,
to the
absolutely.
extent anything gets changed based on, you know, based on those questions, then we can, you know, that would get highlighted as well for the town. Is
Yeah.
that fair?
Yeah, and if I may, listen, I just wanted to, you know, add my comments. Listen, Joe, it's the policy is so much better than it was. It's I mean, I feel like this is like 95% there, maybe a little bit more. I did not feel that way in previous times. Again, except for a couple of comments that I've made already, and I will share with you and in the audit committee by email. Yeah, I think the policy looks great. You know, it's if you take away the backup and you take away the articles and the table of contents, you're right about 50 pages, which is kind of what I felt was right, and we could probably even knock that down a little bit if we really wanted to. So I'm not too concerned about the page count, especially with the backup, except for the statute references, like I had said. But other than that, it's a very logical order now. And I think all your frankly, all the additions that I saw in blue, I thought were warranted. So thank you for your time. I very much appreciate it.
Absolutely. All right, so I guess we'll send any questions to you, Joe, and then Jared or Mr. Chris, if you talk to Tom Bremer, we'll wait to hear back from the town, understanding that everyone has to kind of take a look at it to figure out how much time they need.
Absolutely.
I do think having the changes highlighted as they are here should be very helpful in going through it in hopefully an expeditious manner. So thank you again, Joe and everyone. I think that is it. Mary, anyone else have any comments or questions here? No? All right. I guess I'll make a motion to adjourn then.
I'd second, but I'm not on the committee.
All right, I figured out how to unmute myself. I'll second it.
All right. Okay.
Thank you for calling the meeting tonight. Joe, thank you for your time tonight.
All right.
Goodbye, guys.
All right. Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
All right. Good night.